I must compliment Chris and Janet for a very on-point sequence of speakers here. Because the next speaker is actually going to address this, what these young people just showed us, the fact that we have climate change, that's okay for the planet Earth, and it would be okay for the planet Mars. It's just not so very good for humans. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the next speaker, Steve McDaniel, a long time Mars adept, a founding member also of Explore Mars, a microbiologist, and that's helpful in what he's going to do, an inventor, yeah, definitely, and overall a very strong supporter of humans to Mars. Over the last year, Steve has been working around the clock to develop a well-tested technology to harvest excess carbon dioxide from our atmosphere and nitrogen also, direct air capture we're talking about. And this isn't an academic exercise. It's actually already done at the moment by Steve and his team, which is called carbon capture coatings. Because, well, Steve's company, Reactive Surface Limited, is very high in, what nifty things you can do with coatings, which most of our people think of as paint, kind of paint. Well, as we all can imagine, so it's handy for us human beings here on Earth, capturing the carbon. But it's also really handy on Mars because, there's a lot of carbon dioxide there, and it would be great if we could do something useful with it. Oxygen to support the colonization. The young people already talked about that. But also the way we do, Steve's company does it. We're also talking about, you make it into biochar for supplementing the Martian soil. You can grow crops then. That's, really handy if you're living on Mars. I would like to eat. And cellulose for manufacturing. And if you're thinking cellulose, what are we going to use that for? Ever been to IKEA? Well, they use cellulose in a lot of their products. And so you probably use them too. And so I believe that you, your audience, will understand what it really is here on Earth before we talk about, what it's going to do on Mars. So Steve's professional scientific engineering approach, one that isn't mere conjecture, it's very useful for us here. It's useful for Mars. He's going to walk you through what he's doing. And as you can imagine, and you probably heard, there is the X Prize carbon removal. Steve and his team, it's called COAT, and that's written C-O-2-A-T, COAT, bit whimsical. It's also part of the X Prize, and they're still going strong. So let's hope for you and me and Mars that Steve's invention, while the rubber is hitting the road, is going to hold up and help us all. Steve, the floor.
Artemis is a dear friend, very dear friend, and I have never heard her give a short introduction to anyone. But I do appreciate the introduction. I mean, what about those kids? Is that exciting? I mean, I just... it warms the heart, it really does, and I have to thank my colleagues, Chris Carberry and Janet Ivey, Wade Holler back in the back, and Artemis, and all those folks who have kept this conference going every single year and doing a fabulous job of it. Thank you very, very much. All right, so Artemis has basically told you everything. But they asked me to come here and talk about modifying the atmospheres of Earth and Mars using biology. And you probably are going, huh? I would, if I were in your chair. And I could just say this. If you ask me if it's possible, I will tell you it's not only possible, it's been done. 3.5 billion years ago. The seas were churning with cyanobacteria. Those cyanobacteria radically changed the atmosphere of Earth. It took them a while, 3.5 billion, well, not 3.5 billion, but quite a long time. But they changed it from a predominantly carbon dioxide atmosphere to one that had enough oxygen that people think guys like us can walk around. I want you to do an experiment with me. Pretend you're in your yoga class, pretend you're at the doctor's office, and I want you to take a deep breath. Come on, do it. Like these kids would do it. Maybe you won't because you're an adult and you're too cool, but take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. Do it again. And while you do that, realize that 8 of the 10 molecules you are breathing were produced by phytoplankton in the first 100 meters of the ocean a few days ago. And those bacteria were hit by photons that were generated on the surface of the sun before it hit and it energized that photosynthetic apparatus a little over 8 minutes in transit time. So you're breathing oxygen, a few days old, that was generated by photons striking the chlorophyll of these bacteria and generating oxygen. So the answer is sure, it's possible. But how is it possible for us to do it? That's the question you have. You probably don't know who I am. Let me have the next slide. I'm that guy right there. I've been to Mars 4 times. You laugh. But if you're in a habitat with Robert Zubrin for a month, you have been to Mars. All right? And I love him, and I love his visionary, his vision to build things like the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station. I commanded a crew in 2003 to that station. And 2 other times I was in Utah. One of those times was with the actual architect, the person who built these things. His name is Frank Schubert. You'll hear more about him in a minute. An amazing engineer and mechanic. We placed that, or Robert had this placed on this island right here, Devon Island, up above the 74th parallel, very close to the 90, up at the and well above the Arctic Circle at 66. And they placed that right on the rim of Houghton Crater. And then from there, we staged all sorts of EVAs, okay? One of those EVAs is shown here. We were heading to the north coast of Devon Island because we wanted to see the Iceberg Sea. I wish you could all see it. It would take your breath away. But we were headed to that that area where you see the snow line right there. That's where we're headed. It took us a long time. That EVA was 18 hours long, which you can do in the Arctic because the sun never sets. So we were there. We traipsed across this boulder-ridden field right here, and we saw a geological marker, a geological survey marker, a rock right here had a bunch of red paint on it. More about that here in a minute. Next slide. Okay, that's who I am. I'm a Mars geek, have been for a very, very long time. I and my wife, who's in the audience, have a company called Reactive Surfaces. What does that do? Well, for 20 years, we've been in the business of reaching into nature and getting functionality of some sort, putting it in a special kind of way in paints and coatings, and then asking that functionality to carry on for a very long time. I'll give you some examples of that for a minute. But I want you to do me another favor. You can't see, it's pretty dark. But if you look around this whole room, including your clothing, your glasses, your iPhone, the floor, the chairs, the ceiling, everything, find something for me that is not coated. Not coated. The truth of the matter is, everything that's been made by the hand of man, for the most part, is coated at some point in its manufacturing process. So what does that mean? That means that there is a vast, vast, vast amount of surface area that is coated. And if we can functionalize that, rather than just aesthetically making it pretty and protecting the underlying surface, is now functional, think of the power of that machine. If that can work, then we have a very powerful tool. Our technology, no, not yet. Back. We have won many awards for our technology. That one right up there is actually an award about the technology that I'm going to be talking to you about today. An example of that is really near and dear to our hearts as space geeks is We want functionalized surfaces on the interiors of our interplanetary ships, in our hotels, in the cabins of the Starship. We want to be able to know that those surfaces are not only microbe-free, but also that they're not going to develop resistance. Microbes developing in resistance in space would be a bad thing. We don't want any hitchhiking microbes to be on our probes. Don't want that. So being able to build surfaces that will get rid of those is important. Next slide now, please. So for instance, we build food packaging that has antimicrobials from nature. They're bio-based, and the packaging in which we store meat, cheese, and other perishables. We have reached into nature and grabbed enzymes that degrease, cut down oils, fats, and lipids, and put those on surfaces where we don't want smeary fingerprints. Okay? These are what we're talking about, functional surfaces. Paint is the biggest industry that you've never heard of. It's huge. Next slide. We have even focused a little bit on space. Like I told you, this Coatings World article came out where we talked about self-sterilizing surfaces and also DNA-free coatings, because DNA carries the information that resistance microbes need to have in order to be resistant. We talked about that in this article. So we're turning along here, in 2017, and we're making all these cool things and everything. And then, next slide. Oops, it's kind of cut off a bit. But on October the 8th, the UN panel for climate change gave everybody a really bad piece of news. You all know it. You were reading at the same time we were. My wife Beth and I were catatonic for a couple of days. All the effort, all the technology, all the art, and all the things that we hold near and dear, our children, were at risk. So we got the team together, my team, Beth's team, and we said, what are we going to do? Can we do anything? Next slide. Go back. There we go. Can we use our coating technology to modify an atmosphere that has too much CO2 in it? That's what we asked. And in fact, if we'll spin this right here, you'll see why. Spin that video, that link. Can you spin it? Hello? Wade? There we go. Nope. Can you spin the video? No? We'll give him one more second and then we're going to skip it, because I know everybody wants to go to lunch.
Climate change, its effect.
Yeah, you got audio. All right. That's okay, guys. Let's skip over that. And what that video would show you is it's not just us that's concerned. It's a whole lot of people that are concerned. And it would show you that we gave it serious thought. How are we going to do it? Next slide. Next slide. Hello? Next slide. Wade, can I have the next slide? Oh, please. He says, hopefully. There we go. So where is it in nature that functionality exists? It does. It's the carbon cycle. What can we learn for it? Click. The carbon cycle involves the entire Earth, and it's homeostatic. It controls itself very well. Click. Next. Next. The ocean actually produces a lot of carbon dioxide, but next, it pulls down a wee bit more. It's balanced. Next, cryptogamic soils, including trees and vegetation, next, produce a huge amount of carbon dioxide, but next, they pull down just a little bit more. But here, after the Industrial Revolution started, we did this. Next, next, one more time, click, click, click. That's what we're doing. Actually, more than that. We're pumping out this carbon dioxide, and you notice something different. There's not a downward cycle. We're not capturing it anymore. We're not doing anything to offset that. So it's out of balance. Next, we've got to do that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, next slide, please. Next slide. What you see when you look at the carbon cycle is you've got photosynthesis going on. And it's primarily being done by, you got it, photosynthetic bacteria and primarily the ocean. And it's doing it across vast, vast surface areas. So it's really a matter, just a simple metric of the photosynthetic rate, which is topside about 18 millimoles of carbon dioxide sequestered per meter squared per hour, and vast amounts of surface area, and then you get the amount of carbon. How would we build that functional coating so that it would remove carbon dioxide? I'm going to show you that. Next slide. Oops, I forgot, I lied. That's not paint. There in the Arctic in 2003, I thought it was the Geological Survey of Canada painting a rock so they'd know where they were. It's not. Well, it's hard to know where you are in the Arctic, let me tell you. That's a lichen. That is a red-orange living organism. All right? It's beautiful. The redness of it comes from the algae. Because it's in the Arctic, the sun slants in there about this oblique angle. There's practically no water. The Arctic actually is a desert. That part of the Arctic is a desert. Very cold, bitterly cold, and very windy. And so it's an amazing place for an organism to decide to plant itself and operate. But we see them everywhere on Earth. Every rock that they can live on, they live on. So when we say cryptogamic soils, cryptos in the Latin is hidden, and gamos means eggs, hidden eggs. That's what we're talking about. But what do these things really look like? Next slide. This is what they look like. When you can't take them off rock. They won't come off rock. Next slide. Right there. Oh, great. Thank you. I'm in control. But you're usually in control. Okay. So let me see if this works. Yeah. So if we rip them off the rock in a very careful way, this is the rock surface, which is called the medulla. It tightly binds this several millimeters, this is only several millimeters, to the rock surface. It has an upper surface called the cortex that allows gas exchange, water exchange, prevents too much UV getting in. Then it has all these microfibrils in the middle of it, and here are our friends, the cyanobacteria. All right, next slide. And when you look real carefully at it, this is what it looks like. Down here somewhere is the medulla. That's the cortex, that's where all the gas and water and micronutrients are coming in. These are the microfibrils that very well support the cyanobacteria. It's not really a symbiotic relationship, but kind of. All right, next slide. So when we started to design this coating, this is basically our blueprint. We knew it needed to attach to a surface very rigidly. It needed to have a way to support cyanobacteria that were living happily in this paint. And it had to have an upper surface that prevented UV from killing these cells, but allowed plenty of gas exchange, water, and micronutrients to enter the coating surface. Next slide. So this is what we built. This polymer is from alginate. It is itself a biological polymer. And normally it has a bunch of calcium salts in it. But if you remove that sodium and you replace it with these black dots, which are calcium, all of a sudden it will link up and form a very nice rigid coating. It is known as a hydrogel. We also added some other strands of something called xanthan gum in here to enhance its ability to take up water from the atmosphere. And together, then we placed photosynthetic bacteria in there. And together, that coating does a very good job of pulling down carbon dioxide. Next slide. Would you like to see how?
The process to make our carbon capture coatings is simple and scalable. Here you see two of our technicians First, they mix the algae and crosslinker component with the other component containing the biopolymers that will gel. Then they can apply these, once they're mixed, onto our substrate of choice. Right now you see us applying it to a mesh material. We use a drawdown process similar to that used in screen printing to get a smooth coating with even thickness across the entire sheet.
They always talk about fumes off paint. The fumes off this.
After we wait just a few minutes for this material to gel, we can now place these sheets hanging vertically in our carbon capture module to monitor them for their CO2 uptake. The way we monitor is using CO2 sensors. Here you see them placed in smaller containers monitoring Petri dishes, and we can simply use those to detect the CO2 parts per million in that container over a given time that we want to monitor. We can do the same thing with the larger carbon capture modules, where here you see another one of our technicians that has the CO2 sensor monitoring both the lab air for its CO2 ppm and a sensor inside the carbon capture module to monitor
parts
it.
per million. Ambient.
The sensor connects to a laptop so you can see the CO2 level in real time. Here you can see that the room air is staying steady while the level of CO2 inside the module is decreasing. This module is shown measuring 2 meters squared of carbon capture coating.
Remember, we said we all have to have photosynthesis and it has to go at a maximum rate, but we need lots and lots of surface area. There's not enough surface area on the flat ground to really do us any good. So we have to go vertically. And that's what you see these paints and coatings doing. That's one of the really cool things about a paint. Here we were perking along doing this, and this man comes on the scene, 2021, and offers us a bunch of money if we can do this. That's really cool, but we were doing it even without the money award. We're in it, like Artemis said, we're in it. She's part of that team. We're in it to win it. We believe we can win it. It is not going to be easy. And we're in the top 287 teams. We didn't make the top 15, but we are very happy to be where we are. Next slide. And be ready to click. That's what we've got to do. By 2025, on Earth Day, we need to have done and demonstrate the removal of thousands of tons per year at scale in a real demo, really doing it. Then, at that same time, we have to model the million-ton scale. We have to show a very good model with all the numbers and spreadsheets, et cetera, that we can do it at the megaton level. And next, we have to at least present a plan to put it on the gigaton level. Gigaton, billion tons, trillion kilograms. A lot, and there's a lot of gigatons. All right, so how are we going to do this? We got to do this first. We got to build it at a demo stage. Next slide. Remember I told you about Frank Schubert? The most amazing, on-the-ground engineer, architect, mechanic I've ever seen. Well, Frank calls me about, I don't know, a year or so ago, and he says, listen, I'm building a biomass conversion facility out in Tracy. I'm putting some of my technology into it. I got to have a bunch of kilns in here, and I'm located in the San Joaquin Valley. They have a lot of agricultural waste, and in fact, they really have a bad problem with walnut shells. They pile them up as far as the eye can see. So I'm going to stick them in those kilns, and I'm going to burn them. I'm going to use them to drive these steam boys and purify water. But when I do it, I generate carbon dioxide. Can you bring your plant, put it up next to us at Tracy, and we'll go together? I was thrilled. Plus, he's really fun. Those of you who don't know it, he used to play for Devo, and he's an amazing guitarist. All right, next slide. So we're going to do that. In fact, we're going to do that this year. We're already in the process of building these totes. We call them totes. And we're going to put them under some sort of like a greenhouse situation. And then Frank's going to pump us in as much carbon dioxide as we need. plenty of water in the process, conditioned air, and we want to do it in sort of a controlled fashion and demo. That is what we call a slipstream source. Here we go. I'm sorry, I forgot that I had the comms. There we go. Hold on. And ultimately, what we want to do is build them independent of a plant. We want to build them so that they do what we call direct air capture. What we want to do is stack them deep and sell them cheap. And I don't mean that in any facetious way. We want a lot of them. We're going to have a lot of them, folks. There we go. It's really cool, though. When we actually make, and we actually sequester carbon dioxide, we release oxygen, you know that, and we can produce some very valuable byproducts. Let's look at this for a second. You'll see. We start with algae growing in ponds, but very quickly, we take these and we dewater them, and through a series of processes at Arizona State University, we get a pellet of those. That pellet is delivered to the carbon capture coating facility where we amplify them in flat panels at our facility, and then we pour them into our paint. All right? We mix that very thoroughly in our carbon capture coatings on mesh. At least that's how we think it's going to go right now. We put it into sort of a machine that's like a silk screen, but automated, continually doing it, and build the size panels, as many of them as we want. We place them into a module or a tote that will maintain the atmosphere that we need, allowing in plenty of sunshine and or LED light, depends on how we're going to energize this thing. And it grows them from, very, very light amount of bacteria to a very, very dark amount of it. What does that mean? Biomass accumulation. A lot of biomass accumulation. All right? What can you do with that biomass? All that biomass is very valuable. Remember I told you if we just take the calcium out of it, the coating falls apart and all that biomass comes out. And once we do that, we recycle the meshes, of course. Then we dewater this. We get back down to a very large amount of biomass. We use an ice cream scooper, ice cream scooper to move that into a pyrolyzer, which doesn't have very much oxygen, kind of like you're making charcoal briquettes. We pyrolyze it, and we make biochar. And once you get it into the biochar stage, it is stable. That carbon form is stable for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We don't have to put it down in the earth. We can actually have it very stable in soils. It helps soils obtain and maintain water. And we just hope to continue to amplify these modules. It can go anywhere. In fact, we have plans right now for Kenya. We can put it up next to a facility which is making carbon dioxide, or we can actually capture it directly from the air. All right? Guess what? There's also nitrogen up there, even on Mars. We're going to need nitrogen on Mars, folks. I know we need oxygen, goodness gracious, and we need less carbon dioxide, but we also are going to need nitrogen. Our plants are going to require fertilizer. We're going to use it as a raw material for synthesis. Well, if we take our system and we replace the carbon capture bacteria primarily with ones that are nitrogen fixing, then we produce this thing right here. That's ammonia. Cool thing about ammonia, there's all sorts of things you can do with it. It's a fuel unto itself, but when you crack it with catalytic conversions, all this hydrogen comes off, and you have hydrogen gas, an amazing fuel that when you burn it, makes water. That's right. All right, so what did we do with, well, here we go. There we go. What did we do with that? If we're on Mars, this is Mr. Musk's latest vision, I believe. Notice all of the domed facilities, okay? Many of which are actually depending on, for their oxygen supply and freshness of the air, et cetera, on the biologicals, okay? But we're going to need more. Next. We're going to have to make it, we're going to have to ship it there. This monster, the Starship, has a cargo compartment that will lift 100 tons It's huge, 8 meters across. Next slide. Oh, oop, back. And we can ship everything that we need to do, what I was showing you today, in a single shipment. At least those are our calculations thus far. Next slide. We'll build biochar there. Biochar is a very good building material. It's a great insulator. This is a Swiss building that's got biochar insulation on it. And we also build cellulose. I won't go into all the products, but you know how you use cellulose from paper on up, right? We use cellulose. We build lots of cellulose with these cells. We also build something called syngas. When you pyrolyze the biomass, you produce something called syngas. We're going to have, I'm a chemist, we're going to have a lot of these things to build the kinds of chemistry, things that we need, okay, on Mars. So, you asked me, let me go back. Or someone might ask me, okay, but that's not going to completely transform the atmosphere of Mars, though, is it, Mac? Come on, man. That doesn't get us there, does it? And the answer is not yet. It's an interim process, but remember I talked about this guy, right? On tons and tons of rocks almost everywhere. Let me see if I can get that back. Maybe not. Anyway, the point is that lichen can grow anywhere. And they are nature's paint. And they can grow on rocks. What does Mars have plenty of? It has no dearth of rocks. It has tons of carbon dioxide. It has nitrogen. It has other things. We can make use of it in the interim until guys like the lichen help us transform, if it's possible. I don't know. If it's possible, using things like lichen to actually transform the atmosphere of Mars. Thank you very much. I'm happy to let you go to lunch, or you can ask me questions.
Thank you very much, Steve.